Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to everyone who's joining us for this webinar, Global Green New Deal, Fixing Our Broken Food Systems. It's part of a three-day global counter summit, food systems for people, in response to the corporate takeover of the UN Food Systems Summit, where those responsible for our broken food system, for hunger, land grabs, and climate pollution are deciding how best to protect their interests rather than those of people or our planet. My name is Asad Rahman. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Anti-Poverty Charity War on Want. We focus on the root causes of poverty, inequality, and climate injustice. We work directly with frontline communities and social movements all across the world, fighting for food sovereignty, against extractivism, for workers' rights, against occupation. We also campaign here in the UK on the very drivers of injustice, the neoliberal economic system, the policies of our governments, our big business, and our financial institutions. And together with our partners around the world, we also campaign for a global Green New Deal. I'm delighted to be joined by a wonderful panel of speakers who I will introduce one by one very, very shortly. The format of today's webinar is the panelists will all speak for about 10 minutes, after which I'll open the floor to you for Q&As. Last year, the Secretary General of the UN stated, COVID is exposing fallacies and falsehoods everywhere. The lie that free markets can deliver healthcare for all, the fiction that unpaid care work is not work, the delusion that we live in a post-racist world, the myth that we are in the same boat. He could have gone on to add that the claim uttered by the richest countries in the world in the midst of the COVID pandemic, that no one is safe until we're all safe, will ring as hollow as the idea that those responsible for our destructive industrial agribusiness will put feeding people or cooling our planet ahead of their relentless drive to accumulate profit. Be it the response to the COVID pandemic, the ongoing climate crisis, the crisis of hunger, the crisis of economic inequality, and the deliberate impoverishment of so many countries through unjust and unfair neoliberal economic policies, there continues to be an active denial of the universal truth that everyone has the right to live with dignity. If we glance around the world this week, we have witnessed record-breaking temperatures in Pakistan, 1 million people facing famine in Madagascar, a heat wave across North America, floods in China, Uganda, Congo, Germany, Turkey, and even here in the UK, and 38 degrees temperatures in the Arctic. And all of this is occurring at just 1.2 degrees warming. Yet another warning that no temperature increase is safe, and it's of course deadly for many. Lives and livelihoods are being lost. Killer floods, droughts and famines are the new normal. And for many in the global south, these multiple crises are already overwhelming their abilities and capacities to respond. We are no longer at a crossroads, but we're at the very edge of the precipice. Yet last month, when leaders of the world's biggest economies and those most responsible for causing these crises to act, will lead to a catastrophic warming of the planet of 3 degrees or more. Since then, we've had countless more summits. With this weekend, we had the G20 meeting. We've just had a high-level ministerial here in the UK. And with the clock ticking to less than 100 days to go before the critical UN climate summit, we can already see that the warnings by scientists, farmers and peasants, and even the UN's own World Food Programme, that the 2 billion people already facing hunger issues in the world will be joined by many more as crop yields fail and the new global pandemic will be one of hunger. We know that the richest countries are not only failing to do their fair share of effort to prevent a breach of that critical 1.5 degree guardrail, but they're continuing to promote the same failed plans whose main goal is to protect corporate profits and those of the people who are shaping national and global policies, be it the fossil fuel industry or the industrial food giants. We know that the carbon budget for 1.5 means decarbonisation in the global north by 2030, so that the poorest in the world have room to breathe and be able to cut their emissions by 2050. We know, as many of you all do, that we are in decade zero, where the decisions that are being made now will determine who lives, who dies, whose lives matter, and who is sacrificed. So fixing this crisis requires more than simply moving away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. It needs a fundamental shift away from the luxury that exists in the global north to see issues in their own silos, the idea that we can tinker with the existing system, or the idea that the global north can transition their economies while continue to exploit the resources and peoples of the global south. That, of course, means fixing our food systems, which is responsible for about a third of all global emissions. It's degraded a third of all soils. It's poisoned land, water, and air with its toxic fertilizers. It means ending the policies that have ripped open the economies of the global south, handed over control of food to corporations, to the land grabs, to the privatization of water, and the unsustainable use of water, where 60% of the European Union's land footprint is now in the global south, whilst the majority of the world's food continues to be produced by small farmers, but on less than 24% of land. The call for agrarian reform, for land rights, for food sovereignty has been a call of movements of peoples for decades, from those resisting colonialism, imperialism, and neoliberalism. It has been part and parcel of the call. That's call for living wages, for social protection, for public services, for food, energy, and water to become public goods and not for corporate exploitations, for global taxes on corporations and wealth taxes, for fixing our trade rules that serve the interests of big business, of cancelling of all debt, and of course, replacing the discredited institutions of the WTO, the IMF, and World Bank, whose policies have taken us to the edge of disaster. Today, we can no longer talk about Green New Deals in the global north or plans to build back better or green transitions that sacrifice the people of the global south. We do need a radical global Green New Deal, one that limits temperatures to well below 1.5 through a fair share response, that tackles economic inequality, that puts well-being ahead of unsustainable growth and extraction of resources, that undoes the embedded systems of injustice, of racism, patriarchy, and racialized capitalism that are embedded in our global economic and political systems. And at the heart of that call is the call to fix our food systems. So I'm delighted to be joined by an absolute incredible set of panelists. I'm going to introduce each one in order and ask them to speak. Our first panelist is our dear friend, Omar Aziki. He's from the North African Network for Food Sovereignty and Attack Morocco. Omar represents Attack and Kaditum Morocco. It's a popular education movement. It's committed to the Moroccan struggle against capitalist globalization and the domination of international finance. Attack Morocco brings together trade unions, cooperatives, and associations to tackle issues around trade justice and climate justice, including debt, extractivism, workers' rights, smallholder farmers and fisherfolk, conserving of indigenous seeds, and protecting of land and water. And Attack is an active member of the North Africa Network for Food Sovereignty. Over to you, Omar.
Yes, وبالتالي فهي بعيدة على المصالح
companies, so it's far from the interests of people, and it's also far from the most urgent solutions. For example, the profound transformation of food systems through ecological agriculture, and the aim of that is to achieve the alternative of food sovereignty based on gender justice, climate justice, economic and social justice, biodiversity, human health, and the planet. So the direct producers today of the world's population food, I mean the wage earners and the agricultural workers, the small farmers, the sailors and fishermen and herders are the most affected today by the agricultural manufacturing system and the acquisition of lands by the multinationals and of seeds, markets, natural and financial resources by those companies, as well as the privatization of the collective properties. And this model has the same results in Morocco, leads the same results through the agricultural policies of Morocco, in particular, what is called the Green Morocco Plan, which has been implemented from 2008 to 2018, and a minority of large exporting capitalists, local or foreign exporters, are the ones benefiting from public finances, and they are expanding their properties and increase their wealth. This is at the expense of, first of all, small farmers who lose their lands and resources, and their income shrinks, which are decreasing, and also farmers who work in conditions of oppression are extremely cruel at the wages of misery. Minimum agricultural wage in Morocco is 220 USD per month, and it's not enough to cover the high cost of living in the country. This is in addition to the draining of groundwater, water export, and contaminating it, meaning the water, with heavy use of chemical fertilizers, destroying soils with monoculture and pesticides, and indiscriminate disposal of toxic waste that kills the environment. In parallel, Morocco imports major foodstuffs from cereals, cotton, and sugar, etc., which means that this agricultural model is there to ensure the profits of large exporters and not to provide food for Moroccans. So if we take the region of Sousse, Agadir, southern Morocco, and we see that there is a model of large agricultural groups which are supported by the main policies, official policies, we see that there is a large capital group or large capital groups, Moroccan and foreign, mainly French and Spanish in particular, that have expanded in the region since the late 80s and have settled on the land of small farmers whose impoverishment has accelerated. This region is producing vegetables, tomatoes, red fruits, and acids for export, and it attracts labor from different regions of Morocco to seek job and stability. And in the framework of these groups, we see that the agricultural workers in the region with whom we work very closely are suffering from the fragility of work and the digestion of rights, and also the different legal diseases, legal life, the rights of legal life, diseases and accidents, and the ugliness of exploitation, strike, union freedom. To create a trade union is not easy at all for them. And also the region's working districts are spreading poverty, and infrastructure projects are absent from adequate housing, schools, nurseries, clinics, or houses for culture and recreation. So these problems, because of the capitalist support, the state continues to deepen, the Moroccan state continues to deepen these economic, social, and environmental damages by adopting the green generation strategy, the Green Morocco Plan 20, to Green Generation Strategy 2020-2030, based on deepening dense productive logic. So militant organizations of trade unions, peasants, and consumer associations, or militant civil society associations, networks, coordination for the defense of land and wealth, etc., must mobilize from the bottom to stop the capitalist advance, which plunders wealth and destroys the environment. So it is necessary to coordinate our efforts first to carry out popular education and awareness raising on the alternative to food sovereignty, which is or should be based on meeting basic food needs with an environmental agricultural approach, and also on democracy in determining agricultural policies, food production, distribution and consumption, and the democratic and equitable distribution of land and wealth in a just manner. Secondly, this popular basis made of small farmers, sailors, etc., need to be consolidated from the grassroots base of food sovereignty by small farmers, sailors, pastoralists, Gabon, and agricultural workers to expand. This also includes consumer associations in the cities and the segment of population against the agricultural industry for sustainable, healthy, and environmental food. And this is what we do in the North African Food Sovereignty Network. Greeting to all. This is what I wanted to contribute with, and I hope that I didn't go over the time that was allocated to me. Thank you.
You were perfect, Omar. Thank you ever so much. And you did what I didn't do, which was speak slowly. I'm so sorry, interpreters, for that. Let's move to our next panelist, who's delighted, another friend and comrade, Shintika Rajapakse from the Movement for National Land and Agricultural Reform, MONLA, in Sri Lanka. Shintika is the moderator at MONLA, which is a network of farmers' organizations, NGOs, and people's organizations in Sri Lanka. It was founded in the 1990s. MONLA works towards building a people's movement for food sovereignty through capacity building, mobilizing of small farmers and marginalized communities. It works to protect natural resources and human rights, and lobbies for change and implementation of alternative policies that are just and sustainable. And MONLA is a representative of La Via Campesina, which is the world's largest grassroots federation of small farmers, peasants in the world, and is their representative in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Shintika.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. At the same time, it is a very suitable time, especially because we are working on parallelly about the UN system, about the really we are really listening and hearing about the production and various things. Really, I like to share the agroforestry experiences and how the new government is facing this situation, and what is their aims and objectives, and how are they functioning, and all. Therefore, basically, I like to highlight three important points. for this discussion. What is our experience? We have some forestry experience also. At the same time, really pesticides as well as other problems are also facing our country. We are facing a very critical situation in our country. So whether it is a possibility to change our system to forestry agriculture for the last so many years, really we had some sort of experience within Sri Lanka. Really, we were working towards agriculture and at the same time to uplift our agriculture system. Really, we have a very good history, back history. So we worked, really, we were insisting to work with the environment and our people, really, they were engaged in their livelihoods on country and farming, and we have some traditional knowledge. Really, the resources are also very important. Uh, because we have some sort of actions and we have experience on this thing. So we have to use this experience during the last so many years. We were able to understand their ability. We were really interested in safeguarding them. And this experience is very important in Sri Lanka because for the last so many years, the implement agroforestry, how it works, how it was practiced, and how it was used during our existence with our basic things, food needs fulfilled, and at the same time, the water is suitable for this. And there are diversity of food production in our country because agroforestry concept is there. It was really implemented. It was country clearly. I mean, there is a connection between everything and our lifestyle, our economic style, and political reasoning. I mean, attitudes and various things are there. Therefore, these experiences are very important in our country. Therefore, up to 1960 on towards 1960, we use this experience at the same time within the country. We were working towards the upliftment of our people, and we have used these experiences and actions were very useful in our activities. We had a very good environment this thing, and we have some small lakes and ponds, and we have that I mean, diversity. The diversity is also there, but it should be amalgamated to the farming system. When we started this concept, our actions were there. From these experiences, we were trying to so many. We have to safeguard the diversity, and at the same time, through this diversity, we were interested in to really safeguard the humans as well as the environment. That is the actions and activities were there. So this it is in the wet region. It was a very automated wet region. There are 5 types of layers in the country. Because that is the type of agriculture we were involving. We have to safeguard the found and human beings as well as the diversity, and we had a very close collaborations, and we were engaged in livestock farming. Uh, uh, I mean, holistically, our system is diversified system. So we were able to uh, start the concept and various things. Education and knowledge is very important in these things, and even in the syllabuses we have included really the people, the humans were able to uh, partially or at least partially fulfill their needs, and we were able to safeguard them. So this is a very important thing. What I would say is this is the how our we have a tea plantation. Tea plantation is also include. This is the this is our paddy cultivation. We have coffee cultivation because from this always we can see that's a diversity, and the relationship is there. Therefore, uh, this is the situation important for the last 50 years. It has changed. What is my logical argument is forestry is our basic system, and it is amalgamated with the people and the environment. This is the system that we followed. Uh, I mean, after the Green Revolution and the new liberalism and the capitalism, these are the ideologies and concepts propagated in our country. There was a vast change took place in our country. Basically, there are so many conditions in our country, especially because the established system was really diversified, and at the same time, uh, always the resources are exploited, uh, and the new liberal economic system is introduced, and the multinational companies were involved in these things. And due to these things, there was really backward in this thing. I mean, the need of the market was satisfied, especially the humans' needs and necessity, and at the same time, uh, all things were brought to the market economy, and the people lost their livelihood, and a new because new investment systems were introduced, and according to the new the companies and the multinational companies and the financial companies were satisfied with these activities. So that is the crisis that we are facing today. In the rural economy and rural farming system deployed, we are letters to the world because people really finding very financial difficulties and nutritious, and at the same time the environmental crisis also there. Therefore, we are facing a very tremendous environmental crisis. Globally, there are about 10 important countries. The very important thing is that the economic policies, because they were interested in commercialized agriculture. They produced everything for the market. They tried themselves to include everything to the market economy. Therefore, most of our farmers were suffered from this, and their rights were deteriorated. At the same time, I mean, migration took place within the country, and at the same time, refugees and internally displaced persons were there, and therefore the social economic crisis was also there in 1982-89 in the north and the south of the country faced this difficulties. At the same time, when we talk about the health conditions were also incommunicable diseases. With- At the same time, we have faced the COVID-19 crisis also. So this situation changed. I mean, holistically, when we look problem, there are, the power, power struggle is there for raw materials and distribution, and small, powerful persons really controlling these resources. So our natural change has taken place. Therefore, the multinational companies took a leading role in our country, and they, their needs were fulfilled by the respective government. So this is the situation that we face in our country. But really, we have to go for cryptocurrency. At the same time, we have to talk about the production of food, distribution of food, marketing of food, and the raw materials and resources. Also, we have to look into these things. At the same time, they have we some policies. In this policies, the consumers must be also safeguarded. So accordingly, so we can fulfill these things through sovereignty. Yeah. Uh, so if we are in a position to explain these things, uh, the entire, when we talk about the entire system, and at the same time, sovereignty is also, food sovereignty is also important. There are so many structures in our country, but those structures we have to rectify the correct device structure. It may be the production side, or it may be from the distribution side, or whether we are how we are going to use the energy, power energy. So when we talk about the sovereignty, our aim and our objective, who are going to fulfill this sovereignty, especially the lands and seas and water, can be safeguarded by small farmers and middle farmers. So we have to propagate that way. So the ecology is the basic scientific fundamentals. This. So, on a large scale production of farming, we can't fulfill these things. We have to safeguard the small farmers as well as the middle farmers. Really, the multinational companies can't fulfill these needs in our country. Really, the distribution purposes, we have to find a new method which can be satisfied by the small farmers and the big farmers. And at the same time, we have to safeguard our environment, ecology. So in this case, we must have funds and technology and decision making power, because the small people, powerless people, must have power to make decisions. Then we must have a very powerful and broad movement. Through that only we can fulfill these things. Therefore, when we talk about today, when we talk about the transition of this thing, we have to face these things. What are in order to fulfill this crisis, really fertilize is banned in our country, because we also propagate to ban to fertilize, but this conflict from they have decided to ban the decision, really, because they have taken the decision without considering the agricultural system. This is not a transformation uh, took place through that. Though we are propagating carbonic agriculture, there must be a system. That system we have to allow for the transformation. When we talk about the carbonic agriculture, so we have to educate the persons, we have to make organizations, and when we talk about the entire system, really we have to consider the needs of the small farmers as well as the female members of the farming community is very important. Their contribution is very important in our society. So these things should be considered, and there are some when the proposals put forward by the government, really they are not going to safeguard the small farmers because we have to safeguard the small farmers. The government's petition and the policy is really grab the rights and resources of the small farmers. So this is a contradictory point. Really, when we talk about the last 50 years, during the last 50 years, the traditional farmers and traditional reasons, the traditional system really were grabbed and destroyed during the past 50 years. So the ordinary person really they have a special traditional seeds and resources, but they were not loved to, uh, to farming or to their production accordingly. Therefore, most governments they really imported things from the country. But at the same time, we were able to understand that when we talk about the carbonic carbon agriculture, uh, through this system, the government's proposed system, the farmers are going to be laborers, farming laborers in our country. That, of course, not suitable for our country. That is the reason why we have to, the transformation is necessary. What is the type of transformation we are going to follow? So, in global system, you have to consider that ecological system is also important. So, in our country, we have to continue that system. At the same time, very clearly, we have to consider this because the northern world they used to think about the technology and development of technology and various things, but at the same time, the urban countries must consider the real situation in our country. So how are we going to face this situation? And South must also into these things. And there are small farmers. Small farmers must take leading role in the activities. In order to face the crisis, we have to encourage the small farmers. We have to organize the small farmers, and at the same time, diverse agriculture should be implemented properly in this country. That is the only way to face this difficulty. Knowledge, experience, resources uh, are also very important and necessary. At the same time, when we talk about the land, the seeds, and various things, they are really common resources of the entire people. Uh, I mean, just we can't sell them in the market. Uh, People are faced in so many debt systems. They are tapped into microcredits and things. And the last point I want to say is really we zero budget natural farming is very important. So we have to safeguard our agriculture, our environment, our people. So our deal is we have to look into the because there are so many inputs are there. The inputs are chemical fertilizer, chemical pesticides. So how are we going to transform this? How are we going to transform this into organic thing? But I mean, when we talk about the system is always influenced with the market, and the decisions are made like this. And especially the producers, we have to safeguard the producers. We have to safeguard the rights of the women, men, young men, uh, ordinary people, everybody. So that is the type of system we have to do. But immediately we can't do the transformation. Immediately we can't hand over this transformation to multinational companies and various companies. We have to strengthen the people, the farmers, the small farmers. So through this only we can succeed in ecology, because our base must be agroecology. We have to build a very powerful movement in the south and north. So that is our aim, that is our objective. So through this, that will be the advantages. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shintika. Teresa Anderson, Teresa is the Climate Policy Coordinator for ActionAid International, which is a federation that works for social justice in over 45 countries. She's a specialist in land agriculture and agroecology. She works at the UN climate negotiations to protect the rights of land and livelihoods of vulnerable farming communities. She also coordinates CAN International's working group on and CAN International's working group on agriculture, supports countries across the ActionAid Federation on climate policy and implementing programs on resilience. And she's co-authored numerous ActionAid and civil society reports on climate issues, including a very, very important report, ActionAid's Principles for a Just Transition in Agriculture. So over to you, Teresa.
Hey, thanks, Asad. Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity today. And from what I've picked up of the speakers so far, I think that I'm really pleased to be able to be following these speakers, because as we hear from the previous speakers about the change that we need, why we need that change, my session is more about how can we make that change if we convince our governments and our societies that we want to make this change. How can they bring it about in a way that really centers social justice as that transition is made? We need a just transition approach to agriculture because agriculture is such a major source of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. As has been said, up to a third of the world's emissions actually come from agriculture and food systems. But at the same time, agriculture is so vulnerable to climate impacts. And agriculture is a source of livelihood for so much of the world. In fact, every one person in 8 around the planet is part of the agricultural workforce globally. That's 1 billion people. So there's a risk if we transform our food systems very rapidly, this could create major disruption to people's lives. And there is already so much inequality in the food system, including the fact that 2 billion people are hungry. Many of these people are themselves food producers. So we need to make sure that a transition in agriculture really supports people to have food and livelihoods rather than undermining their access further. Also, we need to make sure that even as we understand that industrial agriculture is a big part of the problem, that intensive factory farming, livestock are the problem, we know that farmers themselves feel demonized, they feel defensive, they can feel blamed for the climate crisis, and they may block action or the shift to agroecology because they fear what that will mean for their survival and for their livelihoods. So we have been learning a lot of lessons from our allies in the energy and the trade union movement. They developed this concept of just transition, and there are some very relevant lessons, but also some differences. The difference between the coal sector and the agriculture sector include there are fewer formal organized unions. There are big power differences between different players in the agriculture sector. Some are big, large-scale industrial farmers, many of whom themselves are land grabbers. There are also small and medium-sized farmers. There are farm workers, some who are formalized, and many who are informal. Many are migrant workers, and there are people across the food chain who have different status, different power in the food sector. Unions also play a different role in the food system than industrial unions. We also need to understand that there are big differences between food systems in the global north and food systems in the global south, how they are connected, but how they are usually not equal. We also need to remember that adaptation is a big part of the need to ensure a just transition. It's not only about cutting greenhouse gas emissions. So when we say we want a just transition in agriculture, we mean that the process must be just and the outcome. So a just transition is not only what we transition to, but how we make that transition. And if we do it right, if we really listen and address the concerns, the pressures, the injustices that rural communities already face, this can be a fantastic opportunity to accelerate the appetite of the public, of farmers, of workers, to create a shift that fixes other problems too and creates ambitious climate action. So we have developed these principles for a just transition in agriculture, and we boil this down to 4 major principles. One is address, don't exacerbate existing inequalities. 2, transform the system to be holistic, to work for people, nature, and the climate. So not just counting carbon, but being holistic. 3, make sure that it's an inclusive and participatory planning process. And 4, the framework to make that change has to be really comprehensive. So to dive into the first one, we need to understand all the inequalities that exist in the food system. There's so much already there, and we need to make sure that that climate policies are not top-down and simplistic, because otherwise they could leave communities stranded with few options for secure livelihoods. So we don't want climate transitions that make life worse for farmers. We need to understand that big agriculture is squeezing small farmers and exploiting workers, as we already heard so eloquently in the previous presentation. We also need to understand that women, who make up 43% of agricultural workers in the global south, and in many countries more than 50%, they actually face even more barriers than normal farmers. Like women farmers are often not allowed to own land, access finance. They may not even be able to receive extension service support and advice just because they're women. Women are also expected to work full-time in the fields and do all the fetching water, fetching firewood, looking after children, looking after family members, cooking. You know, being a woman farmer is exhausting, and you get no help usually from the government. So we need to really address those inequalities if we want to be able to help agriculture maximize its potential for sustainability and transition and food security. And we also need to understand that all these other inequalities of land tenure, hunger, climate injustice, because some countries have polluted a lot more than others, this historical responsibility between different corporations and countries really needs to be understood, so we know who we're targeting to make that change and who we need to support. And we need to make sure that transformations and transitions aren't just tokenistic. They're not just rushed top-down changes. They're not just greenwashed by corporations. And we want to avoid false solutions, including land grabs by big businesses. Like, as we heard before, we don't want to just say, let's shift from industrial or large-scale industrial agriculture to large-scale organic agriculture that leads to more land grabs. No, we want to fix the climate problem, the ecological problem, and the social inequality at the same time through our transition. So that means transforming the food system to work for people, nature, and the planet. And so we want systemic change, not just tinkering about the edges. So that means shifting from industrial agriculture to agroecology and agroforestry, as we heard in the previous speaker, and of course, food sovereignty principles. And this can mean actually consumption, production and consumption of better and less meat. I think we need to recognize in the global north, meat consumption is really very high and not globally sustainable, that much of the world's land, in fact, more of the world's land is put towards producing feed for factory farmed livestock than it is for humans. And that most of that meat is consumed in the global north. We also have a lot of land used for biofuels. And just to illustrate this, a quick graph that shows that half of the cereals, half of the grains produced in the world are actually allocated to human food, and the other half is allocated to animal feed and biofuels. So that tells us that we are really using our land inefficiently if we really want to use our land to feed humans and to protect and restore the world's ecosystems. So addressing that part of that bad planning is a key part of our transformation. Also avoiding, there's a lot of food waste that's unnecessary. Also making sure that adaptation is there, and also ensuring that policies are gender responsive. And so as we make this transition, we've decided, what we want to transition to. We also need to make sure that that transition itself is inclusive and participatory. This means mapping all the different stakeholders, not just the big, rich, elite farming, landowning farmers, but the workers, the women farmers, etc., and empowering them to have their voices in these planning processes and to be able to articulate what it is they need and want, and to decide and map that vision, and giving them the opportunity for the support they need to make that transition. And that will include, doing impact assessments at local, regional, and national level. It means policies that are really inclusive. It also means thinking about what are the training and reskilling, to shift from industrial agriculture to agroecology and agroforestry, from cash crops to a multitude of vegetables. It also means thinking about marketing. How do you sell a completely different crop that you've never grown before? And also, how do you get the support for those years when maybe you're making less income because of that transition? How can you get the social protection to make sure that you have a stable livelihood so that you can trust to make that change? So there are other ways to link in policy to make this transition, including public procurement, of course, regulating corporate power, and linking this with other policies on hunger, poverty, water, sustainable development goals, of course, climate policies, and making sure that international climate finance can help to support that shift. So this approach can be relevant both in the global south and the global north as we think about how to bring farmers on board and help them be excited about the transition that we need in order to protect our planet for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. We will definitely share a presentation with all the participants. I'm just conscious of time now. We're going to finish at 12 o'clock. I know there's a number of questions in the chat and they're also on Facebook. So what I was wondering is maybe I will just pick some of the questions. I'll ask them to the panel. And the panel can just decide which of the questions that they want to answer.
In reality, I would like to talk about the theme of solidarity at the global level, which is becoming a necessity today. And this is something which is vital for the activism. Any fight or combat today at the level of one country only or one region only won't be able to make it or to be victorious and to reach its goals without having an international solidarity. And this is in the same logic of the globalization and the capitalism and the multinational companies. This is how they work. And also the partnerships at the global level of the capitalism, the partnerships between global capitalism and local capitalism. And this is a way to fight against this type of behaviors. And in Morocco, in the region of Sousse Agadir, we need the solidarity of the organizations and the activist networks and the consumers of the European countries to which we export the foodstuff from Morocco. And this through putting pressure on the exporters in European countries and in the UK to respect the international standards in terms of rights of workers, the unionist rights, and the human rights in general. So the exports and the exporters have certificates that they are compliant with these standards. But in reality, they are not applying these criteria and these standards. So as I have said in my contribution, they are exploiting workers in conditions that are very difficult and very low wages. So here this international solidarity and the global networks are necessary to face that. And I think that in the whole region of North Africa and Middle East and also in other regions, this is something which is crucial. This was my answer concerning the first question that was addressed to me.
Thank you, Omar.
Ensuring food sovereignty is the best alternative to the current agriculture policy in Bangladesh in the context of adaptation and resilience to climate change and protecting rural livelihood.
শুনতে পারো?
হ্যাঁ
হ্যাঁ, আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে। জলবায়ু পরিবর্তন গ্রামীণ জীবন জীবিকা রক্ষার ক্ষেত্রে মানে অভিযোজন এবং স্থিতিস্থাপকতার প্রেক্ষাপটে আসলে খাদ্য সার্বভৌমত্ব নিশ্চিত করা বাংলাদেশের বর্তমানে কৃষি নীতির মানে এটা সর্বোত্তম বিকল্প। জলবায়ু পরিবর্তন, খাদ্য সার্বভৌমত্ব এবং কৃষিতে মানুষের মঙ্গল, পরিবেশ এবং সুশাসনের বহুমাত্রিক নীতি বিষয় রয়েছে। ফলস্বরূপ খাদ্য সার্বভৌমত্ব এবং টেকসই কৃষিকে জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের মানে সমন্বিত করে তোলার ক্ষেত্রে যে কোনো কৌশল, জীবিকা নির্বাহ এবং সামাজিক সুরক্ষা মানবাধিকারের একটি অবিচ্ছেদ্য উপাদান হিসেবে বিবেচনা করা উচিত।
needed to include the national policy and action plans to reduce climate change and
জাতীয় নীতিমালা এবং খাদ্য সার্বভৌমত্ব জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের
climate vulnerability over food sovereignty
হ্রাস করা এবং কর্মপরিকল্পনায় মানে অন্তর্ভুক্ত হওয়া দরকার। আর কার্বন নিঃসরণের জন্য দায়ী হলো ধনী দেশ।
in any strategy
সুতরাং এই
to
ধনী দেশের আসলে দায়িত্ব নিতে হবে।
crisis issue and carbon
বাংলাদেশের মতো দেশগুলো
countries should take responsibility
বাংলাদেশের মতো মানে দেশগুলোর জলবায়ুর
only
প্রভাবের যে
solve
ক্ষতি
this issue
এটার
and country like Bangladesh must get compensation for climate impact.
Thank you, Ghulam. Teresa, do you want to have 1 minute? Answer any of those 3 questions.
Yeah, there was a question about 100 days to COP26, and since I follow that process, I felt like I can speak to that. It's great that the people in public now understand, that we need to shift away from fossil fuels. I think it's really important that we spend these next months and years helping to socialize the idea that industrial agriculture, factory farming are like fossil fuels, are just as bad as fossil fuels, and that agroecology and food sovereignty are the solutions that we need to shift to, both in terms of the climate impact and the way that, and we also need to understand that not only do these harmful systems of industrial agriculture have climate impact, but they also concentrate wealth and power and land in fewer and fewer hands, and that they actually use that power and wealth to resist the change, to greenwash, to buy political influence. And this is why the change is so challenging for us. We know that we're correct. We know that we have the science and the evidence on our side, but we don't have the same amount of financial resources and power that the big players have. With COP26 negotiations coming up, there are key negotiations on agriculture. There's science showing that agroecology is the solution for mitigation and adaptation. This is a critical opportunity to turn that science into climate action to save the planet. So the negotiators need to follow that science. They need to develop recommendations to governments to make that shift. And we need to let our governments know that we expect them to make this change. And we strongly encourage everybody to take up the climate message, which helps to empower our message about agroecology and food sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm very conscious of the time now. I want to just thank everybody. Let me just say there's been a lot of really useful questions. We'll pass them also to the panelists. There's been a lot of links in the chat. Please do sign up to updates on the War on Want updates. You will be able to then get information about the struggles of all of our partners here on the panel today, of how you can support them, amplify their voice, and of course together collectively those in the UK look towards the COP, and also work together around ensuring that our solutions that we already know exist can be the center of the transition that is needed from this broken economy that is failing both people and the planet. I want to thank everyone, and thank the interpreters, and I thank everyone joining, and I really apologize for some of the technical difficulties that we had today, but thank you to interpreters Amin, Mohammed, Nazreen, Siva. Thank you also to Sabrina from War on Want, who pulled together this panel, to of course all of you, and of course all of your our wonderful panelists. Please do join this fight for food sovereignty, for the fight for a global Green New Deal, and together let's create a safe and just world for absolutely everyone. Thank you very much.